reducing discrimination on obtaining funding and increasing access. Today, we're joined by Julien Valmary, and I'll let you introduce yourself in one moment. But just to let you all know, we all know that many of us are settlers here, maybe immigrants, descendants of those forcefully brought to the land where we are now, or where you are located right now, or maybe you're Indigenous and, like myself, not Indigenous to the territory where you are now. But regardless of where you are, we pay respect and recognize the original custodians of the land where we are. And out of respect for the rights of Indigenous people, it's our collective responsibility to critically interrogate the colonial histories and present day implications of this. So the work that we do on behalf of the Festival Accès is from this perspective of honoring, protecting, and sustaining this land and its peoples who were first on this territory. So we strive to go beyond just acknowledging the land, and we weave in Indigenous knowledge and share principles and invite you to move beyond acknowledgement and into the doing. And that's the reason why we've been having these conference presentations, so we can move beyond and work in solidarity with our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit brothers and sisters, so that we can create action and also we can create some momentum. So today is the day of creating solidarity, and we're hoping that you can meet as many people from as many different sectors as possible within the arts, culture, and heritage sector. So once again, my name is Farah Fancy. I'm the project manager of the symposium, and I'm joined here by Julien Valmary. Julien, welcome.
Merci. Hello, Kwe. Bonjour. Welcome. I'm glad to be here. So I'm not in front of. I'm not actually in front of the building. I'm at home, and so I use the technology to make this trick. But so you can see where I'm supposed to welcome you. Usually, this is your home as well.
Thank you very much for that. So for those participants who are watching in the audience, you're more than welcome to drop questions into the question and answer box and also into the chat, and we'll be happy to answer those for you. And just so you know, I've got some notes from some other arts councils that I'm going to pass on to you, as well as Julien has some information for you as well. So for those of you who came to a pre-symposium talk we had, we were speaking specifically about funding, because as part of our mandate, we wanted to find out from Asian Canadian artists, what are some of the barriers and challenges that you face? So of course, we found that funding was one of the major barriers and challenges that people faced as an Asian Canadian arts, culture, and heritage worker. And so in that process, we had a pre-symposium talk to make a discussion on what is it that we can do as Asian Canadians to try to offer support to the funding agencies in case there's some needs of a shift of some sort of institutional barriers that they have. So we came up with a bunch of recommendations, which we'll be passing on. And if anybody else has any recommendations that they'd like to offer, you're more than welcome to add that into the chat. We are happy to add that into our report. But at the same time, we thought that maybe the funders also have some recommendations for us to give back to the funding agencies, because they don't necessarily have the same experience, the same history, the same upbringing as we do, not from the same identity, heritage, and culture. So maybe there's something that funders can ask of us to help them better end up helping us. Do you know what I mean? Julien, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. So I'll let you, do you want me to rebound on what you're saying? Okay. So I'm glad to be here. I haven't prepared anything very specific. Farah told me gave me some lines or maybe some ways we could address. And just to tell you a little bit of what I do on a daily basis, I run what we call the General Funding Program, which is the largest pocket of money at the council. And usually when I talk to, and we do that a lot, okay, we go outside, we talk to many different groups. I remember last year I was at BINQ, that there's a number of ways for us to connect, and I'm not the only one on the field. There's a number of people that are on the field, and the employees, the peer evaluator, your peers, arts workers and artists that sits on our juries, our board members, and we make sure that there are representative of the Montreal population. So, and we try to connect as much as possible, but we are only humans. What I do on a daily basis, I run grant programs. So, and grant programs have only one goal, is to fund arts organizations, artists or artist collectives. So we are in the business of getting applications. So only applications who are submitted are getting evaluated by your peers. So funding agencies need you as much as you need them. So that would be my starting point. And there are a number of ways that we are re-examining the way we do our business, and we do that all the time. So people who come to us with concerns, questions, and criticism are always welcome at the Conseil des Arts de Montréal. We fund organizations that are very different, from an artist collective, 3 people, to the Museum of Fine Arts. So we cover a very wide range. And we've been advocates on diversity issues for the past 15 years, when it was not usually an issue that was even discussed among the funders. And we always try to improve the way we do our business and the way we address and we reach out. But we are limited in our means, and we are limited in terms of human resources. So there's a lot you can do as artists, as arts workers, and I can give you some example if you want.
Okay, so before we get into that, I just wanted to re-stress one of the things that you had mentioned. I'm reminded of a cartoon that I saw where this man has been praying piously every day to God that please help me win the lottery, please help me win the lottery. He did everything he could. He was the best intentioned man, did all these good actions, etc., etc. And finally, when he died, he asked God, why didn't you give me the lottery? Why didn't I win the lottery? I did everything you asked. And he said, yeah, but you didn't buy a lottery ticket. So one of the things that Julien said is that if you don't apply, obviously you cannot receive the funding. Now, one of the things, Julien, a lot of the people come and they tell me is that they are afraid to make an application because what happens if they get a refusal on the application? Is that going to tarnish their reputation? What would you like to say to that?
Yeah, I will use, I'm not a huge hockey fan. I'm from France. I know nothing about hockey, but there's one saying that I love from the great Wayne Gretzky, is that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And so if you don't ask, you don't get. So my best piece of advice is just apply and ask again if you get rejected. Ask for feedback. The people who work in granting agencies are getting paid to give you feedback as much as they can, because right now we see a huge increase in grant applications. So sometimes it's difficult for them because their funding is also limited. So their means to respond sometimes in a timely fashion is limited. But you need to understand and get the feedback as much as you can on why, because a refusal can mean many things. Sometimes it's simply due to the lack of funds. So sometimes it's because there was the peers did not understand what you are trying to achieve. And so it's likely that you won't succeed at this one grant application. So when you fail, please ask again. And it will also build a history of applying, because here at the Montréal, the Conseil des Arts de Montréal, our peers sits on a 3-year term. So if you come 1 year and you don't get a grant, maybe next year they will remember the project, and maybe it was not elaborated enough, or your budget was wrong. So you want to get feedback from our agents, who are the middle person between you and the peers that sit on the juries. So yeah, if you don't ask, you don't get. Ask again. And it's important to apply, because as I was saying earlier, we need you as much as you need the funding, because relevancy is key for funding agencies. Public funding is key. You need to advocate. That's something you can do on a daily basis. As citizens, you can advocate for more funding, for more public funding. And if we don't get your applications, we are no longer relevant. So, and oftentimes we get questions on how we deal with the more equitable funding, on how we reach out. So we reach out as much as we can. We try to make things as easy as possible. When they are not, when we get criticism, we take criticism and we change. We have various committees. We have a very good representation on our board of the cultural diversity. It's within our bylaws. Within our evaluation committees, we also have bylaws that, in terms of representation of generations, gender, and artistic and cultural diversity. One of the vice president of Accès Asie Festival, Kakim Go, has been on our evaluation committees. There's a number of people from the Asian Canadian community that's as artists who sit on our juries. And if we don't have the expertise on one specific cultural expression, we will get an ad hoc member to sit on the jury. So we want to make sure that you get evaluated by peers from the same artistic tradition as you. So you get understood. Yeah.
That brings up 2 points, actually. One about the evaluation that you were talking about, so that if people apply, then well, there's a couple points that you brought up that I'm just going to reiterate some of the things that people have told me in other provinces. So I received notes from fundings agencies from provincial arts councils from BC, Alberta, and Ontario. And their advice to listeners who are watching today is that for those 3 councils specifically who got back to me, they said, please apply and ask explicitly for the reasons if you did not receive the funding. Because if they did not accept your proposal, they do have an obligation to tell you what it is, the reason that you did not receive the funding. And from that, there's a learning involved. So you can see if there was a barrier with respect to how the application was created, or if there was just like something Julien mentioned, a problem with your budget, or the problem of explanation and understanding, that exchange that happens. But if you get the information from them, that's the only way that you're going to know. But BC, Alberta, and Ontario wrote me back that please do ask that. You do have that right and the responsibility. The other thing that Julien, you mentioned.
Different funding agencies have different guidelines. So some of them will not be able to provide feedback. Some of them will.
That's right.
Some of them will up until a point. So that's, yeah. Sometimes it's
yes,
tricky.
Canada Art Council. So BC, Alberta, and Ontario has written to me that, and also Canada Council, they do give the information back. And again, like Julien mentioned, there are different limits to which they will get back to you. The Canada Art Council works a little bit differently than, say, for example, the Conseil des Arts de Montréal in terms of peer evaluators, but they all are trying their best to get somebody who knows the work that you're trying to do. So I know the Conseil des Arts de Montréal. I've sat on the evaluation committee also myself. They are looking at specifically what is that specialization. So for example, in the Canada Art Council, they do have evaluator committees who they ask out to the community if you would like to be a peer evaluator. So like Julien was saying, that we do have Asian artists who sit on the evaluation committees from time to time. But in certain cases, you need to put your name forward so you can be that evaluator. So Canada Art Council has a program where you can put your name forward as a peer assessor. And if you want more information on that, you can get a hold of me. And also, I'm going to drop in the chat information from the Canada Art Council on a new strategic plan that they're creating for the future. So right now they're doing a strategy for people in the arts in general, where they want you to get back. They just did a new survey after the whole situation with COVID, and they want people's response on reimagining the arts is what they're calling it. So they're asking for people to give information. So I do plead to everybody who's watching today to please go and check on this website and see how you can give your information so that all of the barriers you can be faced, or all the barriers you have been faced with, start to be included in some of the entry points or the points of access that the conseils are trying to give you funding. So unless they receive that communication from us, they won't actually know what the problem is that they need to solve. So like Julien was mentioning about relevancy. So the more Asian Canadian artists who apply for grants, whether you're an individual, a collective, or an organization, the more they're going to know that these type of grants are relevant for our community. So even if you're applying and getting refused, and it's always because we get put in the side, then maybe that side will become a whole new funding pocket because they keep seeing people apply for grants in the same manner. Would you agree, Julien? You've seen that happen before at the camp.
But the reason of our existence is to fund the arts, and it's the arts with the plural. So that's, and but we have to have a true vision of reality, and it goes through the people who apply. So application is key. Advocacy is key. You know, make your voice heard. Elected officials need to know when you get funding. Other artists need to know that you get funding. It's a circle of how do you say, virtue. You know, it's a positive circle. You know, oftentimes artists will be shy at saying that they got funding. And sometimes people are afraid to go to their peers and ask them, how did you get funding? Can you tell me how I can improve my applications? Mentorship is key among artists. Some artists graduate from universities and they will learn how to fill in grant applications. Some won't because they are self-taught, or they learn with a different way, or a master, or they just moved to Canada. So a mentorship among people who got funding is key. I'm going to do my own promotion, and I'm going to put the link to apply to our committees as well, since I'm here, because we are always looking for committee peer assessors. And it's a 3-year term here, because we want to make sure that people see the evolution and of funding. It's paid, it's symbolic, I have to say. But still, we got some increase in the last years, and thank God. And we are now able to give a fee to the peers who sit on our jury. So we do not get a lot of people applying to become peer assessors. And it's a really great way to learn how to write an application, because jury committees are composed of humans, and you are talking to humans when you are talking to your peers, people who speak the same language. But when you sit on a jury, you really understand the decision process and what really will help you make it. What will help you make it is the value of your artistic project. It's your artistic vision. That's the one thing that will matter. But then translate that into an application, and you will only get that from sitting in a jury.
So that artistic vision is so important, and at the same time, it's important for the representatives, like you were saying, the program officers, to have an understanding of that vision. So we have been encouraging on our side for people to go and meet the program officers. And I also have news from BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Canada Art Council, as well as Ontario and also in Quebec, that they're all pleading for people to come and meet their program officers. So this information I'm giving you today is information that I've been exchanging back and forth with respect to this project. It's not anecdotal information. So for example, the Reimagine Arts program, yes, it's true that it closed on the 21st of August, but they knew that we were having this symposium now. So those people who are coming in specifically from the Asian Canadian symposium and writing to this link that I have sent to you before, they're going to be accommodating all of those people into the survey process. So as I said, these provinces that I mentioned to you just now, as well as Julien has mentioned that, as well as the Canada Art Council, included in that on a federal level, as well as the Canada Heritage. They're all saying that we should be going to meet our program officers, not only to get to know them so we can explain our artistic vision, but also so they can guide us on which is the best program that you should be applying for. We've seen that from a number of funders that they say to us that we get great applications, but they just applied in the wrong funding pool. And so this is something that the Canada Art Council is asking for me to express to you all, is that to make sure that you create a profile for yourself. And from that profile, they can see if your profile of what you're saying you do versus what you're actually doing matches. And if it matches, you have a better chance of receiving that funding.
Yeah.
So there's a question.
Right.
So there's a,
no, it's funny because at Conseil des Arts Morales, we're kind of old-fashioned. We answer the phone. And I know that for some generations, it's completely old-fashioned, but this is really a great way to, you can send us an email and you set up, you read the guidelines first, you gather all your questions and do it early. It's never too early, because once the deadline approach, people rush and there's lots of requests, and maybe you won't have a chance to speak to the program officer if you call 1 day or 2 days prior to the deadline. So get there early, gather your questions, set up an appointment like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, or you can jump on. And many funders have webinars. They're very useful. Professional organizations also. You might not be a member of a professional association now or yet, or maybe you will be. They have a lot of training. ELAN, English Language Arts Network, does a lot of very good training. Diversité Artistique Montréal also. There's a number of ways you can get that, but talking to the program officer is really a very good piece of advice, Farah. Yeah.
Yes, and also with respect to training, we had Nick Maturo on this morning. For those of you who missed that presentation, he gave information and he's saying that he will help people for free for their services to write the first grant. And in fact, I have an email that I'm going to drop in the chat right now from the Canada Arts Council in case you have any information at all that you want to ask them. For those who are not familiar with the Canada Art Council, they're a major funding source for a lot of individuals who work in the arts, culture, and heritage. Of course, there's always that challenge of professionalism, but we'll get to that in a moment. But I'm just going to read you something that they've sent for me that they'd like for you to know, that in order to apply for a grant, you need to have a profile. So you need to find the details on their website by clicking into the portal on the right-hand side. And if you need help with understanding any of the difficulties of creating the different profiles or programs, you can go and write to that email address that I just wrote to you in the chat, because they will directly help you with how to set up your profile step by step. They'll wait with you on the phone and they will help you do it. And there's a technical person who does that. The Canada Council also believes that everyone deserves access to the arts and that all expression should have the same chance to flourish. But we also know that persistent barriers prevent many people from participating meaningfully in the arts. So therefore, we apply equity principles across our funding programs. In addition, we provide targeted funding support for designated priority groups. So you'll find all of those details in the equity page to see if any of those parameters fit under what you are working in. And definitely for us as Asian Canadian artists, they already do have a diversity and equity initiative that's going on. So we do fall under that category. And to make it easier for artists to apply for their first grant, they have a profile for new and early career artists. So with this profile, artists can start their careers, including those who are new to Canada and can apply to the Canada Council for funding. So if anybody has any questions about any of the professional development projects, anything that connected with research and creation, to start ahead of the deadline. And what the arts councils are promoting for me to do is, even before you have a project starting, if you just want to tell them about past projects and what your artistic process is and what your artistic practice is, that even come in and tell them about that. So that way they already know who you are. They can help you focus how you explain your artistic practice, so that when you have your next project ready to go, whether you're an organization, an artist, or collective, you already have that feedback from them, and then you just speak to them next about the actual program or project that you're doing next. And specifically, the Canada Heritage said that that's very useful for you, because what happens when they have an idea of the activities that you've already done and the activities that you're doing, they'll have an idea and keep you in mind. In certain cases, I know for myself, I've received an email that said, Farah, we're having this new funding program that's very temporary and short. It's only for this year. Why don't you see if anybody in your world would like to apply? And so they do listen, and they do keep you on their radar. Yes, we agree the systems are not perfect. Yes, we know that we've got a number of challenges still to overcome, but we need to meet halfway. So we're going to give them our recommendations. They're giving us some recommendations, which I'm passing on to you right now. And Julien is here live with us as well. We've got a comment coming in the chat saying that many funders have nomination forms on their websites, or you can ask an email program officer to ask you how best to nominate you. And so they're writing that I know funders are desperate for more peer assessors, which Julien was saying and alluding to earlier, to utilize, so that they aren't going back and forth to the same folks in the community. Because of course it is hard when you're creating your arts, doing your own organization, to have this sort of second task and responsibility. So we do want to have more and more people as peer assessors representing our community. And so what they're saying in this comment is that the funders can also help you on how to nominate yourself. So hopefully we can see more of those nominations come through, even if they're self-nominated, so we can get more of those peer assessors onto the peer assessment committees. And those of you who just joined in, you can see earlier in the chat that Julien has dropped into the chat where you can apply for an assessment committee to be a peer assessor. Julien, do you have any other comments to add to what I just mentioned about Canada Art Council? With respect to equity and diversity, yeah. I know, for example, the CAM had a specific program on equity, diversity.
Yeah, we have a lot of programs that are targeted to artists from BIPOC, or yeah, this is a BIPOC now, is the way to say it in English. And we do encourage people to self-identify themselves. So on many arts council, as you apply, you will see there are some forms on how to self-identify yourself, and it's really, those are meant for statistical reasons, and they're really key. They're really helping funders if you fill in those forms. Some specific programs here in Montreal are really targeted towards artists from diverse backgrounds. And because we are not there yet in terms of application on the general funding, so we had to create a lot of specific and especially artist residencies. So in order to get the milieu to have a better appreciation of arts workers and artists from diverse backgrounds, we have a very successful internship program called Démarre Montréal, which is a great program, and it's a game changer. It's slow, it's human by human, one by one, but it's really getting some artists who are not able to work within institutions or established arts organizations to get their foot in the door. And we have many good stories around that program, for example. We also have some programs towards indigenous arts. And we have an Indigenous Arts Committee with a very specific, governance within our governance. So that's my best. And being a professional artist now for council is very different than it could have been. It was many years ago. you know, for us, a professional artist is an individual that has a professional artistic practice and who has the necessary experience and knowledge to develop this practice. It could be self-taught, it could be someone who has studied, and the person is recognized within their artistic community, artists working in the same artistic tradition. For many years, it was the peers, but if you are not within the group, so now it's really recognized by their peers, and it makes a huge difference. And it also forces us to have a very good representation on our juries from your peers who understand your practice. So that changes the whole assessment. So, and yeah, they speak the same language as you. And one thing that I forgot to mention is that many of the program officers within funding agencies are former artists themselves or former arts workers themselves. So they do understand the way you speak, and they understand the troubles, and they feel for you. Right now, they genuinely, because the arts world has been hit very badly by the pandemic, and they want to help. So yeah.
So again, Julien, they speak for the experiences that they have. So if the majority of the evaluators and committees are not necessarily from our communities, they can't be speaking for our experiences. So that's why it's really important that we go out, and if we have the time and the interest to do so, that we encourage people that we know in our communities, or we do it ourselves, that we go sit on these evaluation committees, because like Julien mentioned, it's a good learning, because then you know how to write these grants in the future. What I did is I dropped in the chat a few different areas of access that a number of arts councils across the provinces, as well as even Toronto Arts Council. I know this is true for the Montreal Arts Council, as well as the Vancouver Arts Council. These are some areas of access that people would like, or let's say arts councils would like you to self-identify. Again, if you feel comfortable doing so, either Indigenous artists, artists of color, Francophone artists. This is somebody who's writing from outside of province. Obviously, I wrote down later on that this is for English-speaking artists specifically in Quebec, but they're talking generally about minority official languages. If you're a deaf artist with a big D or a little d, or artists with a disability, and that's self-defined as a disability, so it doesn't have to be a specific kind, as well as new generation artists. In certain cases, they call them artistes de relève, or sometimes emerging artists. The age here, this is specifically from the Toronto Arts Council, that they've written 18 to 30. In some cases, they've written 18 to 35. And in some cases, they don't necessarily have an age specification. It's only within the last 5 years of practice. So if you started at 72 as a new artist and you're now 78, okay, you're in your last year of new artists because you're within that 5-year period. In certain cases, they also have newcomers to Canada. So within the first 5 years that you're in Canada, they have separate programs for them as well as artists living in the regions or outside of big cities. In certain cases, they have special envelope. So Julien, do you want to explain how it works when people self-identify as this, like how the envelope kind of opens up a little bit more when you write down that you come from one of these specific groups?
There are different ways to deal with that self-identification within different funding agencies. Each one has their ways of doing it. The way we do it is that we have a bonus point system. So, and it's run outside of the evaluation of the project itself. So, because we have strategic goals that we've set up, and we want to make sure that we can achieve those. So it's really it's a bonification. It's a bonus. So if you compare two very good, because they have to be very good projects, a very well evaluated project, excellent project, and you compare them, and one of them has answers some of our strategic priorities, it will get bonus points. So it could be a deal breaker between if you get funding or you won't. So self-identification is really key. And so that's the way it works. Right now, we adopted an equity policy last year, and we're working on our action plan. And now we're going back to the drawing board because of discussions that we had with our Indigenous Arts Committee. So we are going back to the drawing board because that's the way things are. You know, if we don't do, if we're not doing things to the best of our ability, we have to go back and rework. So if you're looking for the equity policy, it's not there. It's not on our website because we're going back to the drawing board. So and so we will come within 2020, 2021 within a new equity policy and equity action plan. So that's to come.
Okay, thank you for that, Julien.
All of the funders have different ways of dealing with the equity. And you can find that information mostly on their website.
I know that I can say for the Canada Art Council and also the Toronto Arts Council, who's written some of these notes here, for them specifically, they're talking about if people release this demographic information to them, they will keep it anonymous. So this is just for the comparison's sake about two good applications and to make that decision of the point system, but they won't disclose those reasons, and they won't say, for example, if you are diagnosed with massive depressive disorder, for example, they won't disclose that that's one of the reasons, that because you have a quote-unquote disability, that's the reason why you got it to the public. This is just demographic information to help you overcome some of the barriers that exist. But also, Julien, you mentioned the idea of professionalism. That is something that a lot of people still say, even though that you've mentioned that we have so many different ways of defining being a professional artist, people still feel marginalized under that idea of what is a professional. So what would you recommend for them to start to promote themselves, or how should they promote themselves as a professional artist? Or do you have specific parameters on in terms of money, how much money they're supposed to be earning in order for them to be considered a professional artist?
No, we don't. Because we know that the reality of artists is that some of them don't make a living out of their art. So that's the way we define what a professional artist is that it's someone that is generally paid for their work. But we really know what the existence of artist is, and especially now. So mostly the way we assess if an artist is a professional is within looking at its portfolio, is the resume, the recognition, the recognition from his or her artistic community. That's the best way. So there's also one other way, or an additional way, is to join a professional association, but also to advocate to your professional association so they can change the way they see you as a professional artist. So there's been a number of changes in the past years because people were not recognized within professional arts associations, and they changed their guidelines. They changed the way they view. So sometimes, yes, it does require you to make that step towards them. We also advocate to them to make their criteria and guidelines more inclusive. We've done a number of studies here in Montreal, and one of the key goals of those studies is to have a clear understanding of the barriers within some milieu. We did one in dance, for example, in the dance milieu in Montreal, and it led to many changes in the way the Regroupement Québécois de la Danse, or dance organizations, considered professional artists being professional. We did one in visual arts that was released 2 years ago, and it also led to many changes. So that's one way we try to influence, but we don't have a say on professional arts organizations, associations, on the way they define. So it's really representation, and advocacy is also something you have to carry the burden of that somehow, and we know that. But there's lots of changes in the society happening right now, and the arts are usually at the forefront of those changes. So, you know, and it's a good thing. So, and change is happening all the time, and public institutions are yours. So that's why I was putting that picture. This is your house. We have studios. It's an open house. Right now, it's kind of tricky, but public funders are funded by your taxes and your contributions. So, yeah.
Okay, so we have a guest online who would like to ask a question to you, if that's okay. Taylor, you have a question for the group?
Oh, I don't think I have a question.
I see that, Taylor, you had your hand up.
Oh, I must have accidentally hit that, but I'm really enjoying the talk so far, Julianne. I work at Calgary Arts Development, so I wasn't able to email you back, Farah, but I've been tuning in, and I'm putting a couple comments in the chat. One thing I was writing a comment that I can maybe just speak to is—
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah, another tip that I would give to artists, arts administrators, arts educators, anyone working in arts and culture, is to fill out the surveys. As sad as that sounds, I know how unfun they can be. But funders often put out surveys to the community in order to get a better idea and a sense of our current art sector. So whether it's locally or provincially or nationally, you know, we have a team of 2 in Calgary on our council who are working furiously to put out these surveys to get a better sense of the gaps, the challenges, the barriers, the actual reality of what artists are facing right now, especially amongst the pandemic. And so we will be putting out a survey soon, but I know that so many have been going around, especially in these last 6 months. And that data is just so valuable for advocating for more funding, designing our programs, and what kinds of things we're able to offer the community based on what's actually there. And all kinds of things. So I was just going to say, you know, if you see a survey, take the time to fill it out. And I think for the most part, you can opt in or opt out of certain questions or areas, the things that you're more comfortable talking about or not. But it's really, really valuable, I think, across the sector and at all levels of government. So.
Thank you very much for that, Taylor. Did you want to stay on the line in case there are any questions for you in Calgary?
Yeah, I'll stay tuned for sure.
Okay, that's great. Those surveys are really important. Of course, Julien.
I will double click on what Taylor just mentioned. You know, filling in surveys right now is really key, because those results help us advocate for more resources and help us to advocate for you on your behalf to our elected officials, especially. So there's a number of things right now happening. Next week is the Basic Income International Week. I'm just saying there's a lot that can't be solved by funding agencies right now. Decent living for artists is really key. So if around in your province there is I know in Calgary you guys did a great work around the Calgary, the Alberta Basic Income Network, but there's a lot of discussions happening right now on having a universal basic income, and that would really help the entire population and especially artists right now. If you're in Montreal, there's a survey right now from Diversité Artistique Montréal, who's an organization that we fund. I can send you the link, and it's and they want to learn, and we are funding that research, and they want to learn also with the Conseil des Arts et du Québec, and we want to learn on how the effects of the pandemic is different on artists, on BIPOC artists. So I'll send you the link as well.
And there's some other information that I wanted to pass on to you from the Ontario Art Council. Some of the priority groups that I wrote to you in the chat is the same as what they're looking at inside the Ontario Arts Council. And what they've written to me is saying that the Ontario Arts Council has some priority groups that were confirmed in 2013 during the development of the Ontario Arts Council current strategic plan, which is called Vital Arts and Public Value. And the Ontario Arts Council recognizes that other groups also face barriers. So these are other groups other than what I've written in the chat, but these were groups identified as appropriate ones for the OAC to focus on at the time. So the OAC also recognized the intersections that exist among the different groups. So what they're trying to do is to work to ensure that our peer assessment process reflects the diversity of the art sector. And the organization recently began asking applicants and peer assessors a broader range of demographic questions, because they're saying that beyond the above identified priority groups, including LGBTQS identity through voluntary self-identification approach, when this data is available later this year, they're going to have this profile available on the OAC. And they're going to be asking the applicants about that. So what's happening is that they're going to start a new strategic planning process in the coming months and consider the groups that we have again dropped in the chats, but also for people to say if there are other people who are underrepresented or also marginalized, for them to express themselves so that they can be looking at those other entry points and other barriers to access. So I'm dropping in the chat in case people are living in Ontario and watching this, that you can see the OAC strategic plan that went until 2020, and you can contact them about what they should be looking at for 2020 onward. Julien and Taylor, we've just got a couple minutes left, so are there any final words that you want to offer to our participants out there? Taylor, I'll go to you first.
Not off the top of my head. I think we really covered a lot of the really important things, you know, developing relationships with grant officers, reaching out early, asking questions, you know, nominating yourself to be on a panel. I think that's really important. And, you know, even if you just have random feedback that you want to give to a funder about our programs or about our website or about the processes, you know, I think funders are always open to hearing that. I think one of our gaps is not having relationships with everyone in the community. So if we're not hearing from folks, then, you know, that's a challenge. And I think there's so much we can do to try to reach more folks and, you know, broaden those touch points. But if you have things to say, just email, you know, and we'll listen. Yeah, and fill out the surveys, you know, all these things. One point I forgot my data friend would want me to say is we've done surveys in the past where we get a lot of responses, but I think the way that data aggregation works is you actually need to get a minimum number of responses from a certain group. So say it is from folks in the LGBTQ plus 2S group. If we only have 3 responses of folks who have identified there, we actually can't use that data in aggregate and present it in these public reports, you know. So if we get mostly, I think it's a minimum of 100. So if you get 100 theater artists, 100 racialized artists, 100 Black artists, 100 whatever the demographic identity marker is, you need at least, I think, 100 to be able to actually put that information in aggregate. So that's why I would encourage, if you want that perspective to really be shared through the data and the research, encourage your fellow artists and folks in your community to apply so that we have those numbers. But yeah, I think this has been a fantastic talk. Thanks, Farah.
And Julien, just about 30 seconds to wrap up before we get cut off.
One quick tip: keep it short and simple and clear when you apply for funding. Get someone that doesn't know anything about the arts to read your application. It's always a good tip. So you make sure that because sometimes you get everything in your head and it's your lingo, but make sure it's so that's one last very practical piece of advice. So yeah, reach out to us and we are here to help.
Yeah, so don't make those assumptions that people know and understand about the language that you're talking about, that artistic language. That's an excellent tip. So thank you very much for Taylor for jumping in the middle of the conversation. Also to Julien for joining us once again. This time he had more than the 2 minutes I gave him at the other conference that we were doing. It's super tight. Also to all of the art arts councils who have written into me and given their feedback, including the Canada Arts Council,